We'll now move to the open forum where the public is invited to make an issue-oriented comment on any matter of public concern not otherwise on the agenda. I have 3 people that have signed in. Cassie Pinter.
I have a few thoughts regarding last week's approval of the resolution repudiating the Callaway report, etc. Last week, 4 trustees voted in favor of this resolution repudiating all findings of the Callaway report, specifically the harassment complaint that was filed by Trustee McAlpine against Trustee Kostler. 4 of you disagreed with the findings of the report that Trustee Kostler acted in a harassing, derogatory, and unprofessional manner, and that the allegations about Trustee Kostler's Facebook comments were credible and consistent. While I understand that most of you were not able to actually hear the verbal comments made to Trustee McAlpine by Trustee Kostler, the social media posts are indisputable. Copies of these libelous comments by Trustee Kostler were attached to the Callaway report. I have copies of them here as well. 11 times in these pages, Mr. Kostler either called Trustee McAlpine a felon, referred to her as a felon, or referred to her as acting in a felonious way. These statements are indisputable and in black and white. I absolutely do not understand how any of the 4 of you could vote in favor of and sign a proposal saying that you don't agree that this happened. Had you allowed conversation regarding the resolution and pulled some of the items out, maybe you would have a leg to stand on. But written as it is clear that your votes were biased and based on personal feelings rather than facts. At the end of the meeting, when Trustee Kostler called the question after being challenged by a former trustee, he ended all further discussion and forced the board to move directly to the vote. By doing this, he took away the ability for any of the trustees or the mayor to wrap up their thoughts and finish the process. At that time, I was confused. I didn't understand why the discussion came to such an abrupt halt. I think it's important for the residents to understand that by doing this, Trustee Kostler denied his fellow trustees and the mayor the opportunity to express their final thoughts as his usual standard procedure after a motion and a second. Trustee Kostler claims to be transparent, but this action was clearly motivated by his desire to shut the conversation down, particularly at a time when a former trustee had just finished speaking about how difficult Trustee Kostler had been to work with during his time on the board.
So I don't want to be portrayed that you were on this board and I was hard to work with.
Oh, well, Jim, you were on this board, I was on this board, and you were hard. I rose above it, and you know what I chose? I chose to ignore it because I had a higher purpose to serve the village and not to engage in that.
Just a quick thought on transparency. Trustee Kostler claims to be transparent, to listen to the residents, etc. He offers polls on his political Facebook page. He posts pictures and information that shed a positive light on himself. I have said this at several meetings, but I want to reiterate for the record that his political Facebook page, which he calls Cary Connection, is not an open, transparent page representing the village and the residents of Cary. He has taken away the ability for me, along with many, many residents who have challenged his stance on issues, to comment on anything or even vote in the polls that he's asking of the residents. This page needs to be identified as the Kostler-Cavelli political page, not made to appear as a page associated with the Village of Cary. I would like to address, this was a little confusing for me, but I would like to address item 1D from the resolution that was passed last week regarding Attorney John Murphy's findings. Only the final paragraph was cited in the resolution, and it was taken out of context, taken out of context, it appears to support trustees' comments. The statement says, the board agrees with the findings from Attorney John Murphy dated April 15th, in which he states, it is my opinion that the conduct of Trustee Kostler as described in Ms. Callaway's report does not constitute a violation of the village's harassment policy or governing law. Let's clarify this. Based on the other findings from Mr. Murphy, this conclusion was made because, quoting, Harassment unconnected to a protected class is insufficient, and there was no subjective indication which would suggest that the behaviors and remarks of Mr. Kostler were based on trustee McAlpine's gender. Mr. Murphy did not disagree with the findings of the Cary report, which state that trustees Kostler's statements were harassing, derogatory, and unprofessional. In fact, Mr. Murphy clearly states in paragraph 2, I accept the findings as set forth in Ms. Calloway's report. I know this is confusing, but it sounds to me like you all passed a resolution last week that you agree with the findings of the Callaway report and disagree with them at the same time. The resolution that the four of you voted in favor of is partially based on Mr. Murphy's findings. But you omit his acknowledgement of his agreement with the report. As a matter of fact, the findings in the Callaway report don't even mention the village's harassment policy. However, that was the statement you chose to include in the resolution. In a nutshell, item 1D states that the board agrees with the findings of Mr. Murphy, and Mr. Murphy clearly states that he accepts the findings of the Callaway report. Just a couple more thoughts. There was much discussion about the use of taxpayer money relating to this harassment complaint and the ensuing investigation. I believe that Mr. Kostler should be held accountable for these fees incurred by the village as a result of his actions and his behaviors, starting with mispronouncing trustee McAlpine's name, to the verbal derogatory comments made directly to her, to his libelous social media posts, all of which resulted in attorney fees above and beyond normal village representation, and culminating with last week's special meeting called by Mr. Kostler himself, which cost the taxpayers roughly $1,500 or something like that. Trustee Cavelli and Trustee Weinhammer, as women and mothers, and Trustee Cavelli as a police commander, shame on both of you for blatantly dismissing a victim of harassment. And one final question for you, Mr. Kostler. From a moral and ethical standpoint, because you were the subject of the harassment complaint, shouldn't you have recused yourself from last week's vote, as it is clearly a conflict of interest? Thank you.